Mentioned this earlier this weekend. Former Vice President Joe Biden may have given us his best indication yet on whether or not he's running for president. This was during an event in his home state of Delaware on Saturday. Biden slipped up and almost for a second there said he's running.
I'm told I get criticized by the New Left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the United, if anybody who would run. I didn't mean it. With anybody who would run.
That was a moment for Trump's handling, and we quote, Joe Biden got tongue-tied over the weekend when he was unable to properly deliver a very simple line about his decision to run for president. Get used to it, another low IQ individual. Lots to talk about tonight with Ken Thomas, political reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and Laura Barón-López, national political reporter for Politico. Ken, the Biden thing is fraught for a lot of Democrats. There's a whole new generation of voters coming up in the age of social media, quite empowered. They've been told they are the new base of the party. They may not know how Joe Biden dealt with Anita Hill. And Joe Biden's past, as litigated as it has been to old folks like us, is all new to them. Thus, the theory of some Democrats who bemoan this, that Joe Biden standing in the polls may be at its height right now.
Yeah, the test of a Biden candidacy is electability. That's going to be the argument, that he's somebody who could unite the divisions in the country, who could, be palatable to Democrats across the board, and frankly could challenge the president in the places that determined the election in 2016, the states that Biden went to repeatedly as President Obama's vice president, states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And so the question is whether he will be held accountable for these past votes, for these past policy positions that really have shifted within the party, and whether he'll be held accountable in the way that Hillary Clinton was often, as people perused her past. And that's the issue with Biden. It's really just an electability issue.
And Laura, allow me to quote Politico. I figured you would not object. Behind closed doors, the president has fixated on Biden, while top aides have tried to assure their boss that the former vice president is doomed. In recent weeks, Trump has peppered aides on more than one occasion for updates on how Biden is faring in early Democratic primary polls, a sign of just how seriously Trump takes the potential candidacy. Laura, is that because he sees him as a peer, a fellow fighter, a warhorse?
It might be that. It also may be just the fact that Biden is at the top of so many of these polls, and right behind him is Bernie Sanders. But unlike Sanders, again, although Biden likes to say that he is among the most progressive that would run or that are running, he is going to have to face a very different Democratic primary than he ever has before. And he is going to appear more centrist, it would seem. And so I think that is why Trump is worried about him, and also worried about Beto O'Rourke. We have seen already a number of Republican groups attacking O'Rourke, probably because they think that he could be a formidable challenge to Trump. But Biden, again, going back to how he will fare in a Democratic primary, he has not been put on the record on a Green New Deal. He has not been put on the record on whether or not he is going to take corporate PAC money or continue to work with big money fundraisers and donors. And so that's going to be a whole new world for him.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.